כן.
You're following Rabbi.
Yeah, I saw him. I spoke with him. I said, okay, can we start? Can we start?
No.
Oh, why not? Or,
It's standing up.
because of that.
Yeah.
Fine, no problem. So, Shalom, Bruchim Habayim. Let's get started. Bezat Hashem. Take your places. Coffee, whatever is needed. Okay.
No, they stopped the video.
Okay. As Shalom, everybody. First of all, I'm very happy to again give a share here in person and not in Zoom. I was giving the share in person beforehand. It was a different place, as you all know. And then many of the faces here I recognized then, and then still had the relationship through the Zoom. And now I'm very happy to see again to meet the real faces and teach Torah in person and learn Torah with you together. So just as you see, or as you heard, now we're going to start. I'm here, I'll be here next week and the week after, and the week after, a series of 4 classes entitled Psychology and Judaism, or Judaism and Psychology. So first I have to explain why of all things I picked that. Like, for example, I was very happy to meet my friend Rabbi Rimon. Rabbi Rimon and I learned together at the same class from 9th grade, same age group, we'll say, from 9th grade, Yeshiva High School, all through my 9th year in the Gush. Okay, and all the time we were together, we were even sitting pretty close to each other in the Beit Midrash of Har Etzion. We're good old friends. So I saw in the source sheet that he gave this year about a basar meturbat, about cultured meat. And I gave a series of shirim about cultured meat in my community. So I could have chose a lot of other interesting topics aside from psychology and Judaism. Torah and Medina, I gave a series. Halacha and Refuah, I gave a series. So there's a lot of options, but I picked this one. I'll be honest with you. Aside from being a community rabbi, my name is Avi Kannai, for those who don't know me. So Avi Kannai, I'm a rabbi in the shul in Ramot already for more than 14 years. It's my 15th year. In Ramot Bet, the shul called Mitzvah Ramot. I was a Rosh Kol Torah Mitzion, of course, beforehand. And aside from being a rabbi, and still is, I'm a clinical psychologist. I have a private practice. I'm a clinical director of 6 outpatient clinics throughout the country from an organization called Beit Cham. So I'm really very deep in these 2 worlds. And as a yeshiva, after I was many years in yeshiva together with Rav Rimon, and I started to learn psychology and clinical psychology in the Hebrew, I was naturally all the time very busy with where is the harmony, and there are a lot of things that are in harmony, but where are also the tensions and things that are not that harmonious between these 2 worlds. And I was busy with thoughts about it from day one, in a sense, till today. So I thought it's the most natural thing that when I'll give a series of classes, people are there, okay, cultured meat, I have very interesting to say about it, but Rav Rimon will do the job very well, I'm sure. And regarding psychology and Judaism, I think I have things to share that are sometimes maybe even original. So let's see, definitely the perspective might be original. So with no further ado, let's start. So the first topic I chose is freedom of choice, bchira chofshit. Okay, bchira chofshit. So before we look in the sources, let's just give a little overview in terms of, and I'm saying very mainstream. Oh, I'm sorry about that. We'll take care of this. Very mainstream approaches in Judaism, we'll call it. Or maybe, okay, actually here, there's one mainstream and some margins. And then the very mainstreams in modern psychology regarding the matter. Okay, and then we'll go to the sources. Okay, so if we speak about Judaism, which is a very broad, title, so it's very clear that the dominant approach is that there is freedom of choice. Maimonides, it's a cornerstone in his thought, and it's actually the mainstream. The simple man, the simple child, Jewish child or simple person in the streets, Jewish, that knows a little bit about it, you'll stop and you'll say, is there freedom of choice? He'll say, of course. Okay. Why? Because that seems to be something very fundamental. Maimonides established in Hilchot Tshuva. Yeah, in Hilchot Tshuva, as you know, Hilchot Tshuva, there are 10 chapters in Hilchot Tshuva. So right at the center of Hilchot Tshuva, chapter 5, 6, and 7, the Rambam kind of digresses and is strongly supporting and arguing with counter arguments, etc., that there is freedom of choice. In fact, Rambam said, I can't understand the Torah at all if there's no freedom of choice. The Rambam says, hey, hello, if there's no freedom of choice, i.e., God, really, I'm like a puppet, I'll say, and God decides what I'm going to do. If I'm going to sin, if I'm going to do a mitzvah, it's all a game. Maybe you have a subjective experience that you're choosing, but that's just an illusion, okay? You're actually a little robot, a little puppet that someone programs. Well, he says, if this is the choice, what is the justification to reward me on mitzvos and more pressing, to punish me when I sin? Did I punish? Did I sin? Did I transgress? I'll explain that a little even deeper. I think I even shared it years ago, but maybe not. You know, there was a Gaon, Reb Shlomo Fisher. Shlomo Fisher passed away a little more than a year ago, I think, or about a year ago. He was a tremendous gadol. I was zoche to hear Torah from him. Can't define myself a Talmud because I didn't hear too many times, but yes, Reb Shlomo Fisher was a giant, mamash, nu kol Torah kula, and he quoted Nefesh HaChaim, Reb Chaim Mivolozhin, making a distinction between you and your body in several contexts. I'll give you the most simple example. Let's say it's Shabbos now, and here there is a switch, and I don't recognize that switch, okay? And I have itches in my back, you know, and I want to just scratch my back against the wall just to relieve my inconvenience. And I do that, and whoops, the light turns on. Now that's not shogeg. That the halachic definition of what I did here is not shogeg. Shogeg is I intentionally pressed the button, only I forgot that it's Shabbos today. Happens. That's shogeg. What happened in my description is that I had no intention to the action of lighting the light, turning the switch. I was thinking that I'm busy doing a different action, scratching my back on the wall. That is called halachically mitasek, which is a lower level of responsibility than shogeg. Because shogeg, I forgot that it's Shabbos, but I had an intention to the action of lighting, of turning on light. Here, I didn't even have intention to the action. Now, you could formalize what happened here in the case that I gave you. Did Avi Kannai turn on the light? Avi Kannai's body turned on the light. That's true. Avi Kannai's body turned on the light, but did the personality, Avi Kannai, turned on the light? The answer is no. Avi Kannai did not turn on the light. His body turned on the light. Okay? So, going back to our topic of freedom of choice. If you claim that it's not Avi Kannai now choosing, doing a sin or doing a mitzvah, it's his body doing it, but it's not his personality choosing to do it, but he's just a puppet here. So the Rambam says, so what is the justification to punish Avi Kannai, the personality? Okay, again, Rambam didn't write, I am elaborating on the Rambam. I'm kind of further explaining what he says in my way, okay? But basically, that's this. And he quotes very nicely the quote of Avraham Avinu arguing with God, Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat, is the judge of the universe, doesn't do justice. Now, I'll say more than that. You know what? I don't even understand, and that the Rambam didn't say, but I'm adding just a little twist here. Not only that I don't understand the justification of punishment if there's no freedom of choice, I don't understand the concept of commandment even. Or a week after, what is the meaning that you're commanding me if I'm not the agent that is doing, or so in what sense you're commanding me to do something? I don't even understand the concept. I'm even stuck under the concept of commandment. Okay, so the Rambam, for these reasons, and that actually won the Jewish street, I'll say, the mainstream of Judaism, that clearly there is a freedom of choice. We can't understand what's going on if there's no freedom of choice. However, as the Rambam himself points out and tries to struggle with it, there's the famous Kashya. Well, if there's total freedom of choice, that means that God doesn't know really what's going to happen in 2 minutes from now. If you're really free to choose, meaning there's a theological problem here. The theological problem is that God is limited. We think that God is the infinite, okay? Now, if I really, really seriously have a freedom of choice, how is that compatible with the fact that God knows everything? I'll say even more, controls everything. Okay, so there is a certain, and even the Rambam wasn't a chassid, but this Kabbalistic term of tzimtzum, meaning of withdrawal of God from a certain domain. L'chor, you must say it in a certain manner, because it's like in this area, your choices regarding moral actions, at least, or Torah actions, etc., it's as if there is a withdrawal of God. But what about the knowledge? We say that he does know, but if he knows, then you're forced. So you're stuck here. And actually, Maimonides here says, you know what, that's a great question. And it's very hard to understand the answer. And I'll just give you a direction, but it's not an answer, a full answer yet. But, the reason why we don't understand how these two things are compatible, the idea of God, the knowledge of God, and the bechira, the reason why we can't comprehend these two things together is because God's knowledge is fundamentally different, categorically different than your knowledge. Okay, God, he and his knowledge are not two separate things. I was Avi Kannai before I knew the last innovation regarding cultured meat. And then after I read Rav Ramon's class, I said, I have now an additional knowledge, but I was Avi Kannai even without that knowledge. But God and his knowledge are inseparable. It's like an eternal thing that is beyond time, etc., etc. Do we understand fully what we said here now? No, but that's what the Rambam says. And the Ravid, by the way, here I'm giving you a side educational note, if you'll excuse me for getting for a minute out of topic, but that's a little chiddush, educational chiddush that I thought about that I can't resist mentioning it here. The Ravid in his glossary says lo nahaga mechaber keminhag hachachamim, meaning Maimonides didn't act like a smart guy. Yeah, by the way, Ravid said even harsher things towards the Rambam. Don't worry. He says, I don't understand what he did here. You're raising up a question publicly, and then you're saying it's very hard to understand the answer, and actually I don't give you an answer. Now a student will read this, and he will say, he will chas v'shalom go off the derech. I don't know what. What did you do here? The Ravid accuses the Rambam. And then he offers a certain answer. He says, knowledge is not a determination. It's just knowledge. Okay, whatever. And he tries to go around it. Because chas v'shalom, the student will be left without an answer. So that reminded me the famous joke about the heretic that met the rabbi, and the rabbi asked him, what happened? Why did you stop believing in God? So he said, I'll tell you, every Friday night, I would read the Abarbanel. And the Abarbanel on the Parsha always starts with a long series of questions. Hashela achat, hashela shniya, hashela shlishit, hashela yud gimel, hashela yudalid. And then he says, now I'll give you my take on the Parsha and we'll answer all the questions. So he said, I was reading all the questions, but I always fell asleep. It's so long. So I never read the answers. I only read the questions, so I became a heretic, okay? Because I always fell asleep every Friday night during reading the questions, and I never read the answers. So that's kind of the Ravid's accusation against the Rambam. You're leaving the people with a question unanswered. That's not a smart thing to do. And I'm defending here the Rambam, and I'm saying, well, it depends who are your students and in what generation you are. Because I think that Maimonides, perhaps for many people, and think about our days and our teens and is Dafka, his educational perspective here is very smart. Because if let's say I don't have an answer, so okay, the Ravid advises me, so don't write the question. Better not to write the question and start the doubts amongst your students. Better just to be silent if you don't have an answer. Maimonides will reply to him, no. If I'm not transparent with the fact that there is a troubling question here, they will grow up and then they will, all of a sudden, let's say they go to the army, they speak with an intelligent a colleague that is not from, and he says, but what do you answer about this? And then, they see the light. Our Rabbeim, perhaps they were just stupid. They weren't aware of the fact that they're very, very hard questions here. Lahefech, if you already in the Beit Midrash say, here, there's a question, and I don't know the answers. So they know that they didn't discover the universe, that are questions here. You're already showing them as an educator, there's some questions that I don't know the answers to, or it's hard for me to get and I could still remain a believer with questions, which is something that my Rosh Hashiva Rav Amital, who was also the Rosh Hashiva from Rimon, so Rav Amital always educated us. I have a lot of questions, he said, that are unanswered as a Holocaust survivor. I'm part of my belief that a human being is finite and Kadosh Baruch Hu is infinite. There's a gap here, and Dafka as a believer, I understand that I have to live with questions. Rav Soloveitchik writes about it in the beginning of Uvikashta Misham there, I think, or Isha Lacha in a footnote. At any rate, so that's my ha'ara regarding this Rambam and Ravid. At any rate, regarding our topic and discussion. So the Rambam set the tone that an essential part of Jewish belief is a belief in freedom of choice. Yes, there is a theological problem. How is that compatible with God's knowledge, control, whatever, infinity? Okay, it's a question. Okay. Now, in the margins, I'm saying, when I say margins, I don't mean, it's not that I'm evaluating what do I agree more or less. I'm just saying in terms of mainstream Judaism, what is the dominant approach amongst Jews. So in the margins, there were approaches that limited the freedom of choice even within Judaism. It starts in the medieval times with Reb Chasdai Kreskas, one of the biggest critics of Maimonides, Or Hashem. He wrote a book, Or Hashem, a philosophy book. By the way, Reb Shlomo Fisher, who was a big lamdam, the same one that I just mentioned now, he published this Or Hashem, which is a very hard book. So Reb Chasdai Kreskas, he says that there's some vagueness as what is his exact position. He definitely limits the freedom of choice. The most extreme reading of him will say that he actually says that in reality it doesn't exist, meaning you only have an experience of freedom of choice, but really you don't have a freedom of choice. What will he answer the Rambam's question? How will he answer? So he says, no, the purpose of punishments is just to do, God is merciful. God loves us. And God wants us to be good. And because of that, like behaviorism, he shapes us, I'm saying now extreme, like robots, by reward and punishment, that we will actually do the good things. Because he has mercy on us and he wants us to cling to him. Now, what is the purpose of this? Okay, you can go more and more and more. And also he says that what really counts is therefore not the action, but whether you're happy with what you're avodat Hashem b'simcha. This is the area that whether if you identify with the mitzvah, that's maybe your contribution to the pot. That's him. Now, extreme Hasidic approaches. One second, okay, and then yeah, please.
Reward and punishment. It might be clear from the sources what particular reward or punishment is for a particular mitzvah or navirah. But it's very difficult for the individual to see a direct, immediate correlation between an action and a possible reward or punishment.
That's absolutely true. At any rate, this is a question to everybody. Reb Chasdai will tell you, according to Maimonides, you could also ask that if it's a punishment for my freedom of choice. Well, I don't see that I'm punished. So here he will say, you know what, you have a good kasha, but it's regarding my argument with the Rambam, it's not relevant. Now, extreme Hasidic approaches, like Reb Tzadok HaKohen Melublin in some of his statements, and more maybe clear. There was a Yerushalmi Tzaddik that is an Admor, even though after his death, Reb Usher Freund has many followers here. So in the extreme readings of these, there's no freedom of choice. And you're totally dependent on God. Every mitzvah that you're doing, it's just the chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and you should just never have gaiva, never, you should acknowledge that you and the sinner, if it was you without the siyata d'shmaya, you would be the worst sinner. So don't be judgmental. Rather, you pray that Hashem will do chesed with you and will be mezakeh you to go in the good way, and that's it. And really, the only freedom that you have is really to understand that it's all an illusion, that you're in control. Meaning God created you in a way that you think that you're in control, okay? And maybe the tiny choices you have, that you should understand that it's not you, it's God, and therefore I need to pray, okay? But I don't want to elaborate on these. I just gave a brief outline of the freedom of choice opinions in Judaism. Again, the mainstream is that we have a freedom of choice, like Maimonides. What happens in psychology? And then we'll run into the sources. What happens in psychology? So here, it's very common to speak about in modern psychology, I'm talking about the 20th century, let's say, three main streams, okay? Again, within these streams, there are a lot of variations and a lot of disputes, but three big streams. The first stream is the psychoanalytic approach by Sigmund Freud. He's the founder of this school. Of course, there are a lot of arguments within that school, but for the sake of discussion, The common way, and then I'll say why I disagree with it, but the common way to present Sigmund Freud regarding the question of freedom of choice, the way it's even written in textbooks like the one that I read, Introduction to Psychology, or the way I was taught, is that Freud says that there's no freedom of choice. Why? I'll explain. Because Freud understands that you have an illusion that you did this and this action because of this conscious cheshbon. But really what is much more dominant in defining what you're going to do is your unconscious world. Meaning, there is this, as you know, Freud gave the parable of the icicle. There's an icicle, I think ice what?
Iceberg.
Iceberg, exactly, iceberg. There's an iceberg, most of it is under the water, and what you're really aware of is just the edge. Meaning we experience that we have mental life. That's great, but that's just the edge of the icicle. What's really down there and not easily accessible. That's very, very important. Will be accessible only through psychoanalysis, hypnosis, dreams, whatever. What is not easily accessible is the majority of our mental life, which is consisted of strong drives, traumatic memories, and all kinds of stuff. And really, these things behind the scenes are really many times behind of your decisions and actions. So consequently, a popular way of presenting Sigmund Freud's approach is that he thinks that you don't have a freedom of choice because you're really controlled by your unconscious world. We'll return to that. I think that it's not accurate to say that Freud didn't believe in freedom of choice. I think the least it's not accurate. But I just presented this thing. The next big stream is the behavioral approach. The behavioral approach was very, very popular in America in the first half of the 20th century. And even now, it is very dominant and important. Only now it's a little more subtle because now we're talking about cognitive behavioral approach. But for the sake of our discussion, the extreme behaviorists, meaning Skinner, Watson, what they said in a nutshell is that you're really shaped by the environment. Very close to what I said in the name of Rabbi Kreskes, meaning the environment shapes the individual. Individual is really born like tabula rasa, empty. Watson said the great statement, give me a dozen babies and give me the proper environments of rewards and punishments for each. And I will do of any one of these babies what you request. A rabbi, a priest, a policeman, a thief, a murderer. I could shape. The person is really shaped by the system by the associations made by his actions, and whether he's actions that will be reinforced, will be learned and acquired, and will become part of the permanent repertoire of behaviors by the individual, and actions that are, let's say, punished will be extinguished. Okay, that's the behaviorist approach in a nutshell regarding our question. So according to the behaviorist approach, as you could see, l'chora again, there's no room for freedom of choice. There's no personality here that chooses to do the good or to do the bad. You're just here. I'll share with you a story that I heard. I'll share with you a story that I heard personally from a person that claimed that he was witnessing it in Boston years ago. There was a public debate between, you know what? Oh, it's better that I'll say this story later, okay? After the third approach. The third stream is called the existential humanist approach. I now combine two branches, the European existential and the American humanist, but it's called broadly the phenomenological approach. This approach says, no, we disagree with the psychoanalysts, we disagree with the behaviorists, we think that a human being is different than an animal, and he has a subjective experience, and he's striving towards self-actualization. And we're optimists, at least in the humanist version of it. And what you need is to have empathy to the patients, whatever, and to help him understand how he interprets subjectively, experiences subjectively the events. And yes, he has here freedom of choice to self-actualize himself or to give subjective meaning to what he's going through. Think about Viktor Frankl in the camps. Okay, maybe he doesn't have control over the events, the external events, but he definitely has a choice in terms of how I perceive the event and how do I experience them, and also a choice to self-actualize myself, etc. So the other three approaches. I'll just end this overview and then we'll go to the sources. I'll end the overview with a cute story that I heard. I never saw it printed. So I really feel lucky that I just heard it from a person in Rehovot. This person told me that he was present, I think in Harvard or wherever it was in Boston. There was a public debate between Skinner, who is a very smart guy, and he was an extreme behaviorist. Just to explain how extreme he was, he wrote a book called Beyond Freedom and Dignity. That's a book about utopia. Basically, he says the problem of the West is, I wrote it in the 50s probably, just about to give it. The problem of the West that they believe in this shtuyot, I'm saying it, of human dignity, freedom, and that causes us to be stuck. If we'll all recognize the fact that we're all robots, I'm saying it, we're all shaped. So the way to create a better world is just that we will create a world with a proper positive reinforcements towards the desired behaviors and punishments, let's say, for the behaviors that we don't want them to happen, and we'll forget about freedom and dignity, and then everything will be great. So I'm just giving you an example of how extreme he was. Okay, now Skinner on the one hand, and who had a public debate with him? Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers was the most popular spokesman of the humanist approach. A man is born good. He's really good, and he's not violent, and there's no aggressiveness that is born, just for the Freud thought, and even Winnicott and others thought that part of the makeup that we're born with is an aggressive drive for survival, whatever. But we have born mulad, born aggressiveness. Rogers said, no, he was a humanist. We're all born very good people. People want to be good in their deep inside. And why are they violent and aggressive? Because they are frustrated, because they didn't have empathy, and they don't have self, and they're struggling with the fact that they can't self-actualize themselves. And therefore you should have empathy and recognize their desire to grow and to self-actualize and to have freedom of choice and dignity. So you see, these are two opposites. So what he told me, this public debate went this way. First, Rogers spoke. And Rogers spoke passionately about what I told you about subjective experience, self-actualization, optimism, freedom of choice. Okay, human beings are different than animals, etc., etc., etc. Now, as he was getting excited and mitlahev, okay, Skinner was sitting, again, he was the first one to speak, yeah? So Skinner was sitting in the front row, and he nodded with his head. Or actually, the first time Rogers did this, out of his excitement, he did this, yeah? clapped on the table. So when he did this, Skinner nodded in his head. And then Rogers did again this, and then again Skinner nodded in his head. And guess what? The frequency of the claps grew and grew and grew because Rogers was always nodding in his head. That's it. So Rogers stopped his speech, and then Skinner went on and he said, my dear, my esteemed, respected colleague, you spoke about the freedom of choice. I think you weren't aware that you were subject right now to operant to conditioning. Yeah, there was conditioning going on here. Did you recognize, everyone recognized that the frequency of your banging on the table grew and grew and grew. And you know why that? Because I was positive reinforcing it, and you were just programmed to clap more and more. So you spoke about freedom of choice, and while you were speaking about it, you were actually a subject to conditioning. Okay, I told you it was a smart fellow, Skinner. At any rate, let's go now to our source sheets. That's the pasuk in Deuteronomy. Behold, I'm presenting before of you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing that you will adhere to the commandments of Hashem that I'm commanding you today. If you will not listen, and you will and you'll go off the way to go after to worship Avodah Zarah. So here, the pasuk here, he says, I'm presenting in front of you two ways, a blessing and a curse. And the blessing is dependent on, of course, there are many interpretations here, but I'm just saying, linked somehow to you listening to the commandments and following them. And the curse, if you will deviate and won't listen. So simple wordings, a principle of freedom of choice and reward and punishment. Let's go to the end of the book, towards the end of the book, my Bar Mitzvah Parsha, Parshas Nitzavim, the end of it. Look, I have presented in front of you, Moshe is telling the people before they enter the land of Israel. Life and the good, and the death and the bad. And then he says, I am taking the heaven and the earth as witnesses to the following fact. I presented in front of you life and death. And you shall choose life, so that you will live, which is an interesting term. You should choose life so that you will live. But okay, I have many interpretations on that, but we don't have the time for that. At any rate, here we have a clear pasuk that the simple reading of it is saying, God is saying, yes, I'm presenting in front of you a freedom of choice, but I'm not from the UN. I'm not neutral. I present a plea that you will choose the good. I think God here serves as a very, very good model of a parent, meaning the fact that I give the choice doesn't mean that I'm from the UN. Freedom of choice doesn't mean that I'm neutral. I am trying to direct, I'm hinting, I'm hoping, I'm maybe a little bit pushing, but on the other hand, I give the space. He gives the space for the choice, but he's not neutral. That's what we see here. That's God's model here, as presented in the Psukim. Now let's go to the Gemara and Brachos. Amar Rabbi Chanina, Hakol b'idei shamayim, chutz mi yirat shamayim. Everything is in the control of God, of heaven, but yiras shamayim, the awe of God. Meaning, simple reading of this statement, or let's forget about simple reading. How does the Rambam read this statement very easily. The Rambam said, God controls all the world, but all the things that have to do with the awe of God, i.e. moral actions, mitzvos, okay? All of these are in your hand. So that's now how, and I told that a chassid of Rabbi Usher, I checked myself if I'm correct that that's the way Rabbi Usher Freund will interpret that statement. And I'll tell you what I came up with. And he says, yes, exactly. Rabbi Usher Freund would say, no, not like the Rambam. Actually, God is controlling everything, including your mitzvos, including everything. Don't never give a pat, never feel, I achieved, I did it. No, it's all a chesed from God. If it was only for you, without the siyata d'shmaya, you would be the worst sinner with your tithus and everything. I know it sounds very harsh, I understand. But he says, Hakol bidei shamayim, chutz mirat shamayim. Everything is in the hand of God, aside from the acknowledgement that it's not me. That's the Yirat Shamayim. The Yirat Shamayim is to understand that all of what I'm doing is not me, it's him. And since the natural thing is to have an illusion, that's the way God created our psyche, that we think it is us. So here is your point of choice, yeah? To understand that it's really God. That's how he will interpret Hakol bidei shamayim chutz mi yirat shamayim. Let's go further. Hu haya omer. Let's go to the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. Everyone sees it? It's Pirkei Avot, Perek Gimel, Mishnah Yudaled. Hu haya omer. He was saying, Chaviv adam shenivra b'tzelem, chiba yetera nod'a lo shenivra b'tzelem, sheneemar b'tzelem Elokim asa et adam. It's Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is saying, in Perek Gimel, in a famous Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, he says, lovable or chaviv, he is with affection. How do you say it? Affection, yeah, but chaviv, like he is being with affection, whatever, I don't know. What? Beloved, yeah, the person that was created with the God's image. He has a special affection because he was created in God's image, as it says in the verse, B'tzelem Elokim asa et ha'adam. God was created in God's image, and that's why he has special affection. How does the Maharal, Miprag, interpret this thing? I just want to say, what is God's image? There is a professor called Yair Loberboim, or Menachem, one of the two. I think it's Yair, but I'm not sure. He wrote a whole book, different models of how scholars in Judaism understood what does it mean, God's image. You could say God's image, seichel. You could say God's image, moral feelings. You could say many things. So let's see how the Maharal understands what is the meaning of we were created in God's image. He gives a very popular interpretation that is written also in Or Samech and others. Ha'adam nivra b'tzelem Elokim. Man was created in God's image. V'yesh lo dimyon bazeh el Hashem yitbarach. And in that sense, he is similar. He has similarity to God. Ha'adam shenivra b'tzelem Elokim. Man that was created in God's image. Yesh lo sgula zot shu b'rshut atzmo. He has this virtue that he's in his own authority, control. Just like just as God does whatever he wants, man is a little God. That's the Tzelem Elokim, that he could do whatever he chooses to do. V'kacha Adam, and the same, the human being, yesh reshut beyado, he has the authority, he has the ability, לעשות מה שירצה, to do whatever he desires, והוא בעל בחירה, and he has a freedom of choice. I'm showing that because, freedom of choice, individuals' autonomy are attributed correctly to modern values. Yeah, it's very clear that the shift from the medieval ages to the modern, to the new age, no, that's not a good term. Ha'et ha'chadasha. What happened? hundreds of years ago when the mid ages, the turn from medieval age to the modern, okay, that's what I said, modern era. So the modern era, one of the most key characteristics that differentiates the modern era from medieval and ancient world is the focus on the individual and his autonomy. Now, as you see, this is a Jewish value as far as the Maharal sees it. Yeah, man was created in God's image, and the meaning of the interpretation that Maharal gives, that like God, he could do what he chooses to do. Oh, how is this compatible with the fact that God is not limited and he knows everything, etc., etc.? Okay, we said already, that's a theological problem. And if you understand, we're a little stuck here. That's what the Rambam tells us, because if I sacrifice the principle of God knows everything, that's a very, very high price theologically, because God is the infinite. But if I sacrifice, Rambam says, the idea of freedom of choice, then I also have theological problems, because then what's the justification to punish, as he says, of commandments, etc. Now, let's see the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot that is right after it.
The expression nodat lo, is that crucial here? Because man can be created in God's image, but the fact it was important that he knows. What does it mean nodat lo?
No, nodat lo here, as far as I understand, nodat lo is differently. Not that he knows, it's known that he's affected, okay? Not.
What does that come to?
Not that nodat lo, he has. It's like an objective statement, okay? Now, let's see the next Mishnah. Right after Tselem Elokim and the Maharal's interpretation that Tselem Elokim is freedom of choice, what is the next Mishnah? That's a classic Mishnah regarding our topic. Hakol tzafui. You see Mishnah per Gimel Mishnah Tetvav. Hakol tzafui ve'areshut netuna. The kasha that the Rambam asked is already presented in the Mishnah. A dialectical, it's very classic to Pirkei Avot. I'll just give you another example. Im ein ani li mili. If I'm not for myself, then who I have? Ukshani le'atzmi mani, but I'm alone is nothing. Dialectical statement. Yeah. So the same here. Hakol tzafui. On the one hand, everything is known in advance. God knows everything in advance. But on the other hand, there is a freedom of choice. Uvetov ha'olam nidon, and the world is judged for the favor. We won't interpret that now. Vehakol lefi rov ha'maaseh, and all the judgment is according to the majority of the deeds, meaning some idea of reward and punishment, but we'll see how the different approaches towards our topic also are reflected in different interpretations to this term. Hakol nidon lefi rov ha'maaseh. We'll see that very, very soon. Let's now go to another building block, and then I'll show you some of our sources that correspond to some of the approaches that I gave in modern psychology. Okay, let's see the Babylonian Talmud in Masechet Shabbat, a famous Gemara that some will claim a Freudian Gemara. Haiman, this person, the Bemadim, that was born in the luck, meaning at the right time of the year, whatever, that is according to Mars, meaning the luck of Mars, which is Ma'adim, I believe. Yehi gever ashid dama. He, the one that was born in the planet, according to the luck of the planet, or according to astrology, the planet of Ma'adim, Yeh gever ashidam, will be a guy that will be a blood shedder. That sounds very, very frightening. Now you understand that they have a siman, Ma'adim. What is Ma'adim? What word do you hear in Ma'adim? Adom, dam, blood. So one that is born in Ma'adim, our sages are saying it. Yeah, he will be a blood shedder. Now, Amar Rabbi Ashi, So Rabbi Ashi says, I umna, he will either be like a doctor that takes blood, I ganva, maybe he'll be a ganav, maybe he will eat tabcha, he will be a shochet, I moala, maybe he will be a moel. So what do you see? There is this guy, his nature from birth is something that has to do with bloodshedding. But where will it go? To be a moel? To be a shochet? Or to be a murderer? Oh. So you see that it's an interesting combination. There is a predestination regarding a certain trait, but that trait itself can go this way or that way. Amar Rabba, that's a great statement. Listen to that. Rabba, the Amora, is saying, Ana b'madim avai. You know what? He tells the people in the Beit Midrash, guess what? Here you have an example. I was born in Mars. And his question was, but hello, I'm not a Moel, I'm not a Shochet, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nurse, and I'm not a murderer. So you see here, I give you a counterexample. You say that everyone that was born in Mars has a certain characteristic of bloodshedding. Here, I'm a guy, I'm sitting right next to you. I was born in Mars. There's nothing of this in me. Look at what they answer him, his friends. Amar Abaye. So Abaye answers him, Mar, the master, meaning you. Just to remind you, Abaye was a student of Rabbi. Rabbi was third generation, and Abaye and Rabbi were fourth generation of Amoraim, Babylonian Amoraim. So Abaye answers his Rebbe, Mar Nami, the master also, Anish Vekatil. You are a Dayan. A Dayan. As a Dayan, you, even if we won't interpret it literally, you are giving psaks. You are convicting people. Convicting people, punishing people is that tendency of Mars, of Ma'adim. So even in very subtle, more subtle expressions, you see that what you called predestination, okay? So, predisposition, yeah, thank you. Predisposition. So, that's what we see here. I want to, regarding freedom of choice. So we see here on the one hand, you could say some limitation, some predisposition, but still leaves the room for freedom of choice. Where do I take? Some things are from birth. And by the way, we have today in psychology, we talk about the nature-nurture debate. And as you know, the behaviorists were extreme to the nurture, meaning one is born total tabula rasa, empty, and whatever the environment will shape in by rewards and punishment, that's what he's going to become. And on the other hand, there were people that believes in genetics and etc. that are speaking about a lot about nature. Today, all of us believe that it's a combination of nature and nurture. There's still debates. What is more dominant? Of course. Now, here you see a very nice, you see here, there is a nature born in Mars, and there's, I won't say nurture here, but perhaps freedom of choice or self-work, whatever, we'll see. Now, let's see how the Rashbats is one of the Rishonim. He is the son of the Tashbets. He is a medieval, in Algiers, I think, and a medieval Rishon, towards the end of the Rishonim, or more in the second half of the Rishonim. Let's say he's after Maimonides, okay? That's for sure. He's hundreds of years after the Rambam. I'm saying that because we'll soon see the Rambam as an opposite approach, okay? And we'll see how the Rashbats and the Rambam correlate to modern psychology. That's what I'm gonna want to show you. The Rashbat says the following. When he's commenting on the Mishnah of Hakol Tzapui V'Rashut Netuda, everything is known on the one hand, but on the other hand, there is a freedom of choice. So the Rashbat is saying the following. Therefore, there are two opinions here. One, one holds, he says one opinion, he's not talking about Judaism here. He gives like an overview, just like I started, an overview of modern psychology. So he starts with an overview of theological approaches, not in Judaism even. And he says, there are two basic opinions here. One is that God knows nothing, has no hashgacha, knows nothing about what the human being chooses. And therefore, a man is totally free in his choices. That's the belief of the Greek thinkers. I'll explain soon.
The gods.
No, I'll explain soon. And this is not the opinion, Rashbat stresses, this is against the opinion of our sages. Now I'll explain you. He's very clear here. Just think about our Aristotle and about the beginning of the Kuzari. Aristotle says, God, he's interested and he even knows about whether I helped the old lady cross the street or not. You're lowering him. He's much more elevated than that, God. God is something totally not, it's a logic cause of the world. Logic, not chronologic, because if it's chronological, it's a problem. That means he was missing something before. That's why he created. God is the ultimate, since God is the infinite, complete. Therefore, if you say that he needs to know something that didn't happen yet or whatever, then he's lacking something. God lehefech, in order to maintain God's infinite, absolute completeness, that means that he has no shaykhis to the world, no hashgacha, no knowledge, nothing, and no action. Very static God. Okay, that's the Aristotelian view of God. And that is definitely fitting what he says here. Okay, he says, God has no clue what you do. You have a freedom of choice. Oh, you as a filthy creature of matter, not spiritual, these are not critical things at all. Okay, what you choose to do or not choose to do doesn't matter. Now, Hashenit, the second opinion, says Rashbatz, is the extreme opposite. She'ein beyad ha'adam reshut la'asot klum. Fatalism. A man doesn't have any power to do anything. Ela kol b'gzerat haborei yitbarach. Everything is in the decree of the Creator. Everything is pre-decided, predefined. You have no freedom of choice. V'zeh da'at chachmei Yishmael. That's the opinion. So the Greeks say God doesn't know anything and you have total freedom of choice. The Islam, the students of Ishmael, they say fatalism, Goran. We hear that today, by the way, when chas v'shalom, I'm saying with pain, when let's say a soldier that is Bedouin or Druzi is killed in a terror conflict or a military conflict. So I hear many times the parents saying in the radio interview, "Kemesiach lefi tumo," Zakol Goran, meaning it's a very extreme belief in fatalism, meaning that's the way it is, that's the way it should have been, and that's it. So fatalistic. V'zeh keneged haTorah, and they said that is also against the Torah. She'amra uvacharta b'chaim. The Torah said clearly in the psukim that I quoted you, you shall choose life, meaning that there is a choice. So he says, we have these two extremes, Rashbat says, and think about where he lived. He lived in medieval times. He was definitely exposed to both views. He was aware of the Aristotelian Greek opinion of God doesn't know anything and man has total freedom. And he was aware of his Muslim neighbors that their belief was there's zero freedom of choice. It's all God. It's all a decree of God. And now he says, V'raboteinu zal, and our rabbis taught us this from the Itztagninut, meaning from astrology, because they said in the Gemara in Shabbos, now he quotes the last Gemara I learned with you, this person that was born in Mars will be a man that is a blood shedder, and Rava asked, I was born in Mars, and they answered him, you're also a judge. Hare, you see, I went to the row. Hare, that's 6 lines from the bottom. Hare שהרשות נתונה ביד האדם לעשות הדבר הידוע בסוף המעשה. So you see that there is a freedom of choice to bend, to shift, להטות, the thing that is already predisposition, and why there is some element that is how do you say that? Predetermined predisposition. It's either because of the the decree of God. It's maybe because of the decree of the stars, and it could go le mitzvah or la avera. And le mitzvah or la avera, that's your choice. Lehatot, to, how do you say hataya? Shift. You could shift it to the mitzvah or to the avera. That predisposition that is dependent on the stars. Nowadays, we'll say by genetics. Okay, but it's the same principle. And by that, I understand the statement of Rabbi Akiva and Pirkei Avos. Hakol tzafui. Look at how I said, hakol tzafui v'harashut netuna. I presented, here we see the Rambam stira. On the one hand, everything is known. On the other hand, there's a what we don't understand. He has a very creative interpretation, you understand, in a harmonious way. He said, Hakol tzafu, one was born in Mars, so everything is known that he has a characteristic of being a bloodshedder. That's Hakol tzafu. And I will shift it to the mitzvah end or to the avera end. So that's how he interprets the Mishnah. Kol tzafui v'harashut netuna. Both are correct.
So tzafui translated or explained as context?
What?
Maybe tzafui can be context?
No, tzafui will not be context. Tzafui will be exactly as it means. It is already known. It's expected, meaning tzafui literally means expected. It is expected that he's a bloodshedder. That's out of question. That's a given. That's nature. That's the way he was born. Hakol tzafui. Will be no surprises regarding that matter.
That he was born under certain stars or something, that's tzafui.
What?
But if he was born under certain stars, that's
and therefore, because he was born under stars, or nowadays, because he was born with a certain genetic makeup, so things are expected. And they're a constant. They're not changing. Okay. Rabba is a bloodshedder. That's not changing. Will this trait of bloodshedding be bent, be shifted to a mitzvah or to avera? This is depending on what do you do with it. Rabba, that's harashut netuna. Rabba chose to be a dayan and not a murderer. Okay, that's what he.
What I don't get about this, if you're pardon the phrase, is God created the world, and everything that's in it. And then for millennium, everybody ran loose. So we had the Noahide laws to try and steady things down a bit. Obviously, he didn't plan for people to do what they were doing. He made people. And humans being humans, carried on in spite of that until they came to the 10 Commandments. So the 10 Commandments are, I'm just speaking my mind for the moment, are a set of rules by which these people that he created and have developed over thousands of years or whatever you want to work on, to live a way of life which gives them some sort of purpose. Instead of running around killing everybody or being in charge of other people, it's a standard to follow, right? So if everything was preordained, you think you might have power to do things your own way. But if they're not preordained, but you have the power to do whatever you want. You have guidelines which common sense tells you don't do this, but you do that.
Okay.
There are always going to be people who are going to do their own thing, in spite of the fact that it's not necessarily acceptable to either the Torah or a normal way of life. If you don't happen to be a Torah believer, other religions, other people who don't have faith in any spiritual being, and therefore you can say everybody has freedom of will, but you have to use guidelines. And if you're brought up in a world where the guidelines are getting blurred and more blurred, you've got what you've got today.
So look, it's very nice. I still didn't quite understand, and for the sake of time, I won't. What's exactly the question? Let me explain. The statement is great. I'm just saying, God, it seems in his speech to Moses before, that he knew that the people of Israel will sin and there will be exile. He knew everything in advance, and then of course he asked, well, if he knew everything in advance, what's the purpose? So at the end of the day, we have to go around these questions of, on the one hand, freedom of choice, on the other hand, God's knowledge. What?
Why can't we understand that? From this perspective of God, he knows everything what's going to happen.
So that's how I interpreted it to begin with, but I just gave you the very original interpretation of Rashbat, which fits in the words very good too. Let's finish the source. Okay. ולפי זה אמרו בפרק כל היד, שהכל הקדוש ברוך הוא גוזר על הטיפה, that God has a decree that a person will be rich or poor, hero, strong or weak, smart or stupid, that all of this is according to this thinking drop, and God gives a decree. But he is not making a decree whether it'll be a tzaddik or a rasha, meaning there are a lot of things that are pre-decided, but the moral aspect, tzaddik or rasha, that's in his hands. If he shakol bidei shamayim, chutz mi yirat shamayim. Okay. Now, here, the Rashbat's approach that is building a lot on this Gemara on Shabbos of one that was born. So Rashbat's in a way has a lot of link, I won't say similarity, to the Freudian approach. Meaning, if you remember, I told you that